My name is Patrick Wright. I'm the Vice President for Legal Affairs at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Let me just make that absolutely clear. I have no doubt in my mind that the governor believes that what she is doing is right and that she is trying to save lives.
They made the sacrifice, and we can't let this sacrifice have been made in vain. And that's precisely why it's so important we continue to keep our guard up and do these things. We are re-engaging the economy, but we also can't forget that just 10 weeks ago, we were number 3 in this country in terms of number of positive COVID-19 cases. We were number 3 in this country with regard to the highest number of deaths.
Having that local power, having sheriffs and police chiefs and mayors be able to make decisions allows Michigan to be controlled by where the COVID problem is worse or where maybe it's not as big of a problem. So that's why is that why it's so important that we have local control and maintain that at a time when the governor appears to be taking that away? Yes,
and the governor the governor has come to a different conclusion. She's believed that we need centralized power because she's made a decision that she alone is getting the best information and that she alone should be making these decisions, that she alone is responsible for how many COVID deaths we don't or don't have. And so she has decided to try and take the power away from these local elected officials and place it in the hands of a centralized bureaucracy that she can control.
A few days ago, our state, at the direction of our governor, sent 6 state police troopers to a 77-year-old barber's shop to serve him with notice to stop what he's doing. He's trying to earn a living, he's trying to feed himself, put a roof over his head, and get through this crisis like each and every one of us here are as well.
Places where we aren't seeing COVID hit as hard. Right now it's largely concentrated in the Detroit area. In areas where it's not being hit as hard, some of these things you're feeling the economic impacts more and getting less of the health benefits. And the governor is trying to change some of that and give herself more power.
Why is the Mackinac Center standing up for one particular business in Michigan?
Yeah, Sarah Hoff's the owner of the business. It's in Holland, Michigan, named Ardor and Grit. And the reason why that we are standing up for her is she's the personification of the downstream effects of the governor's policies. She's a person who's trying to do her best by everyone around her to be as safe as she can, but yet to run a business. She has a family to feed. She's going to go bankrupt. And so we have to ask the questions of, we're probably saving lives in what the governor is doing, but at what cost? And Sarah and her business personifies that cost. And so we're trying to help her so that we can contextualize what's happening all across the state.
Right. If we continue with, if the lockdown would go on indefinitely, we'll have no life to go back to.
Right. There's, our first lawsuit was about quote, unnecessary, unquote, health care. Well, really, it's all necessary because if you don't go in and get your teeth cleaned, you're not getting the cancer checks that your dentist does for oral cancer. If you're not going in and getting your normal checkup, you're going to miss the fact that you've got a irregular heart rhythm. And so you're going to see people who had adverse health effects, and it's going to be a little bit downstream. And so that was what our first lawsuit was about. But as we continue to do this stuff.
What are the nuts and bolts of that lawsuit?
The nuts and bolts of it were that the governor's executive orders were improper for a number of reasons. One, she just didn't have the legal power to enact these things. But secondly, that they were harmful to the health of the state in general.
You're talking about the everyday health care, like eye doctors, chiropractors,
surgeries, yes,
chemotherapy.
All of this stuff that people have largely been afraid of, one, because of COVID, and two, they've been told in certain circumstances they can't go and see their doctors. Now, the governor has changed that as of today, and thanks to our lawsuit, because there was supposed to be a federal court hearing yesterday.
How do we know that, though, Pat?
How do we know that? Because the federal judge was supposed to hear a preliminary injunction hearing on it yesterday. The governor, after we filed our lawsuit and after they filed their response to our preliminary injunction, changed her conduct one day after the federal judge was supposed to hear it, thereby mooting the ability of the judge to hear it and potentially undo her powers.
And did you tell us that there's Governor Whitmer has over 100 executive orders today?
Yeah, we're averaging about 1.3 a day. And one of the main problems of averaging so many of them is these things, according to the governor, have the force of law. And so the law is changing 1.3 times a day as to what Michigan people are supposed to be doing in order to keep us safe during this difficult medical time.
And I believe it's June 1st where every company, every business, small, medium, large, they have to have not only a plan in place, but I believe that they're supposed to have they've got to develop a COVID-19 preparedness action plan. They've got to have a response plan and a consent with recommendations in guidance on prepping workplaces for COVID-19 developed by OSHA. Now, OSHA has obviously done some great work over the decades keeping people safe on the workplace. Are you saying that it's going to get a little confusing for the average company to try to keep up with this? Certainly.
It's very difficult even for those of us that are lawyers to keep up with it day by day. The governor is taking the powers from the from the local officials, be they sheriffs or be they prosecutors, and placing it in these bureaucrats. She's also incredibly enhancing the penalties. So we went from, under the Emergency Manager Acts, there's a 1945 Act and a 75 Act, the governor is allowed to make violation of an executive order a misdemeanor. That means $500 fine and potentially 90 days in jail, but that also means you get the criminal protections. In administrative law, you can get a $70,000 fine per incident as opposed to $500. And the felony that goes into it, not 90 days in jail, is 3 years.
And this applies to small, medium, and large businesses?
Yes, this is what she did through her MIOSHA executive orders, and that's a context for a second Mackinac Center lawsuit. We filed that lawsuit in the Court of Claims. Actually today, the government has to respond, and then we will get a hearing. Again, we've moved for a preliminary injunction to try and make the decision move as fast as possible to get a resolution to find out if the governor has the power to do this.
The penalties, if those ever were enforced, those dollar amounts that you're talking about, would literally bankrupt a small company.
Yes, and our concern is that the governor is doing this in order to quash some of the dissent and the civil disobedience that's rising up, particularly outstate, against what's been going on. But the governor is looking for tools in order to quash that dissent. And we're concerned that the amount of power that she's bringing against these people is disproportionate to what they're doing. And so there is a real important question of when must this stop?
You know, the governor's worked really hard. There's a lot of moving pieces to trying to keep people safe. Do you feel as though your industry in particular is being singled out and it shouldn't?
Well, I think quite a few are being singled out. I don't want to think I'm all that important, but
do you think though you guys could conduct your business safely and do distancing?
Yes, we only deal with 1 or 2 people at a time.
Okay, let's assume that we all agree that there was an emergency. Is there still an emergency? Who gets to declare when it's over? How do we challenge those things? The governor is, by and large, saying, I and I alone will tell you when it is safe. And we do not believe that in a democratic republic that is the right answer.
We're living at a time, what you're talking about brings up a really good point about that issue of imminent threat. And for instance, a number of researchers are talking about the social determinants, such as the disruption of jobs, goods, services, and supply chains. So obviously COVID is an imminent threat, but so is losing jobs, goods, services, and disrupting supply chains.
Sure. I mean, there's talk internationally about the downstream effects on how many people are going to starve in other countries because the United States has shut its economy down. There's questions about, okay, are we going to see an increase in suicides, domestic violence, all of these things. And here's the thing about a democratic republic. It's messy. We put a lot of voices into it and we force compromise. And so while one person may have very strong feelings, we force and try and create a consensus by having many voices involved in the decision making so that we end up with the best compromise between all of them. So this is exactly how this system was designed. It was designed to be loud. It was designed to be messy, but it wasn't designed to have one person alone make all of these important choices.
I think our viewers are going to want to know, are governors, any governors, executive orders, are they enforceable? Are they a law?
Well, that's a matter that's being litigated right now. There's about 12 to 15 lawsuits where the governor's executive orders are being challenged. We're involved in 3 of them directly where we're representing people, and then we are involved in a 4th where we filed an amicus brief where the legislature is saying, we've shut off the emergency, you now have to go, even though this is extremely important, you now have to go through the normal legislative process. This is unsustainable. At some point, we have to return control and open up society.
Right.
And so very soon, either a court is going to have to tell the governor that, or she is going to have to come to that through some sort of political pressure.
What are some of those things that business people should be thinking about?
If I'm feeding 20 families because they're my workers and they want to get back to work and they need to get back to work, do I have some moral obligation to them even though the government is saying that I shouldn't? These are very difficult personal questions, and I think everybody's going to have to make their own decisions.